everyone! So today I wanted to show you guys my heating setup for the hedgehogs. I have actually featured this on the channel previously and it hasn't changed all that much, but it wasn't in its own video then, it was actually in a cage tour, and so I had a lot of people asking me to sort of go into how I've got my heating set up. So if you're interested in how I've set up both Draco and Blaze's cages, please keep on watching. Keep in mind, just so you guys are aware, their wheels are not in their cage because their wheels are dirty. It's bright and early in the morning, so I popped them out so that they could soak in some vinegar and water. So without further ado, let's just get started. Alright, so we are currently in Draco's cage. He is in his cozy sleeping, because like I mentioned, it's early in the morning. Their cage is a Critter Nation, as you can see here. And every Critter Nation comes with a little loft piece. Now it normally has like a black plastic tray that you can put on it so that an animal can safely stand in it. However, since my hedgehogs aren't using the loft section, I've modified it a little bit so that it will hold a heat lamp. So what I've done in order to do that is I've taken a grid that I had from their old CNC cages, and I've zip tied it to the frame, and that way the holes are just big enough to hold the heat lamp dome. Now I have an 8.5 inch dome. I'll leave links to this entire setup for you guys. You really probably want a 10 inch, but the 8.5 works for me because I also supplement heating, but I'll touch on that in a minute. So for those of you who don't know, my setup is called a ceramic heat emitter setup. And a ceramic heat emitter means that the bulb that I use, let me get underneath there for you guys. That means that the bulb that I use, this one right here, this white bulb, it doesn't emit any light, which means I can use it all night long if need be without having to worry about it lighting up the cage. That's really important for hedgehogs because they're nocturnal. You really do not want any unnecessary light around them in the evening. So before I touch on what all of this is and how it works, the very most important thing you need for a hedgehog cage is a thermometer. Every cage needs a thermometer in it. So there's Draco's. I'll leave a link to this one down below. I think even PetSmart sells these in the reptile section. They're really cheap. I think this was a few dollars. And they're really nice because you can run the probe wherever you want. So I've got mine somewhat in the middle of the cage, and I have it attached to this so that when I close the door, I can still see the temperature. Not super well, but like enough. If I'm walking in the room, I can just check without having to open the doors, or I can open the doors if I want to. Blaze's is set up the same way, but on the opposite side of the cage. In fact, his entire setup is identical to Draco's except for it's flipped so that his heat emitter and loft is on this side and Draco's is on this side. As I mentioned, I have an 8.5 inch dome. That works okay for me because I have supplemented heating with a space heater, but if you're going to be doing this, I would recommend getting a 10 inch dome. The wider the dome, the more it'll disperse heat. You don't want the wire domes or anything like that because that'll allow heat to drift off this way, and you only want heat going down. So I also have a clamp on this, and that is actually zip tied to the roof of the cage so that it's nice and secure. It wouldn't go anywhere anyway, but sometimes when the hedgehogs wheel, they get going really fast and they'll shake this, and I didn't want the vibrations to cause the lamp to slide over here or anything like that. It wouldn't fall off of this, but I don't want it to really move either because I have it set up where it's going to heat the cage the most efficiently. It's almost in the center. This loft doesn't quite extend far enough to put it right in the center, but it's close enough. So now that you know what the dome is, the bulb on the inside which is a bit more difficult to show you because of the way it's set up. But the bulb on the inside is a 150 watt ceramic heat emitter. Again, I'll leave all the links down below for you guys. The 150 watt is the one I chose to go with. You can also get a 100 watt, but I prefer the 150 watt. Now, the ceramic heat emitter lamp does come with its own switch, which is here. I keep it on all the time because I also have it hooked up to a thermostat. Now, don't confuse a thermostat and a thermometer. So this is a thermostat, and I'll show you Blaze's thermostat too, because his is different, and his will be the one I link down below because I actually prefer it. So the way this thermostat works is the same way a thermostat in your home works. It actually controls the temperature, so I have it set. You can see it's a little bit in the green there. It'll turn on right around 77 degrees and turns off around 80. Or probably around 76 degrees, honestly. That is because that is my hedgehog's temperature range. Your hedgehog can be set at a different temperature range, of course. Now, the way a thermostat is set up is you can plug in your lamp. So that's the plug to the lamp. This cord coming out here, the one in the middle, is plugged into my wall. And then this cord here leads to, oh, I bumped the temperature. That's not good. Now that cord there leads up to this here, which is the Thermostat Probe. And this is how your thermostat knows what temperature the cage is. Normally you would want to keep it as far away from this as possible, as well as the temperature probe. But I have mine set up the way it works best for me, and I recommend doing that with yours as well. Now, I kept the thermostat in the cages, and the way I did that is I took another one of these CNC grids here, or storage grids, and I bent it in half, and then I just zip tied it to the back of the cage. And that secures it there well enough for me to just sort of put that in there, and I'm not worried about cords hanging down into the cage other than the two probes, which my hedgehogs don't bother. The actual cord for the thermostat comes out of the bars back here, and since this is sort of streaming down the side, I did zip tie it to the side just so that it's out of the way. Now, like I mentioned, the setup down below is identical. There is one difference, and hopefully the lighting isn't too bad for me to show you since it is a bottom cage. Here we go. I got a little extra light for you guys. The thermostat for Blaze's cage is actually the one I prefer, and eventually I'd like to switch Draco's over to it as well. And the reason I like this one better is because it's not just color. There is a bit of a glare there, but as you can see, there's actually temperature on there, like the numerical temperature. So it's easier to set to your specific temperature range. And this is the Zilla one. I will have this linked down below for you guys instead of the other one that is in Draco's cage, just because I find this one a lot easier to set and monitor. But yeah, they do the same job. It's just that one is color based and the one below is number based. Alright, so now that you've seen my setup, I just want to explain to you guys why I have a heat setup for my hedgehogs and some of the things that help me make sure that this heat setup is effective for this cage. So the first and most important thing about this is that hedgehogs are temperature sensitive, which means that they need to stay above 72 degrees Fahrenheit and roughly below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It sort of depends on the hedgehog and the situation, but 72 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit is optimal. The reason hedgehogs need to stay between 72 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit is because hedgehogs cannot properly hibernate. Their bodies think that they can, but unfortunately what ends up happening is it becomes very lethal for them. So When hedgehogs start to hibernate, they get very, very cold to the touch. They'll be wobbly if you try to help them walk. They'll be overly defensive. They'll be unresponsive sometimes. But the most obvious sign is that their stomachs are cold. Now, a hedgehog's stomach should always be warm. So if you ever pick up your hedgehog and their tummy is a little chilly, it means that their cage is too cold for them. Now, they don't regulate their body temperature, which is why we need the heat lamps or other options to keep them warm. I'd like to do a whole other video on hibernation and how to stop it if your hedgehog has started. So I'm not going to touch on that too much in this video. I just want to show you guys how to prevent it, which is a proper heat setup. A lot of people don't have them, and then unfortunately they get really scared when their hedgehog starts to get sick or starts to hibernate, and then they have to figure out how to save their hedgehog's life. Now, I do have this heat setup here, but you do have another option if you'd like to do something else for your hedgehog, if you're not comfortable with heat lamps. I will say that heat lamps are the most energy efficient. We barely notice the heat lamps on our heating bill. I believe when we switched to them, it went up maybe $2 from our regular billing. The other option I'm going to show you, which is a space heater. A space heater is much less energy efficient, and it has made our energy bill go up about $50. But that's just sort of par for the course with us at this point, so we're kind of used to it. I don't have a space heater brand to recommend specifically. I do enjoy the one we have, but there are plenty that do the exact same thing. If you are going to be doing a space heater, there are some things to keep in mind. It's not energy efficient. It will heat the entire room, so if you have your hedgehog in your bedroom's going to be pretty warm. And they're not quite as reliable. One way that you can help keep your space heater reliable is by purchasing one with a thermostat. Now, there is a little bit of a glare here, actually a bit of a glare, but this actually does have a thermostat built into it. You can turn on heat, and then you can set it to the temperature that you want it to kick on at. So I want my space heater to stay around 76 to 78 degrees, so it kicks on around then. Technically, I don't really need a space heater in the pet room for the hedgehogs. I need it for the tenric, but I do like to keep this room somewhat toasty anyway. Not as warm as the hedgehogs like to be, but just nice and toasty in here for the other pets as well, who are used to having a room around 78 degrees. So there's a second option for those of you who don't like the idea of having a space or having a heat lamp. I will say that heat lamps are far less likely to short out or things like that. Something very important to note is that those are the only two options for external heat. Heating pads are not an option. They short out. They can be incredibly dangerous. They have melted through plastic bin cages. They have given hedgehogs severe second and third degree burns. Some hedgehogs are scarred for life from heating pads shorting out. The other issue with heating pads is that it only heats the floor of the cage, and you need to heat the air around your hedgehog because they are not constantly touching the floor of the cage, especially when they're on their wheels, they're running. Those wheels aren't heated at all. So, those two options are your only choice beyond heating your entire home warm enough. If you are going to do that, that is totally up to you. I know I don't like my room as warm as my hedgehogs like their room, so I don't heat my whole home warm enough for them. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave them down below. Again, I'll do a separate video on hibernation for you guys very soon. We are coming into the warmer months of the year, so I find that people tend to have much less of a issue during the warmer months, but I still want to go ahead and get one out for you guys soon because I've been meaning to do one. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about that, go ahead and leave them down below and I can answer them as best as possible. And like I mentioned before, all of the links to my entire setup, the thermometer, the thermostat, the heat lamp, the heat bulb, and I will try and find a link for my space heater. Those will all be down below. There are other brands of everything I use, so feel free to shop around. Just make sure wherever you're buying from is reputable so you get things that work correctly. And yeah, that's about it. Like I mentioned, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down below and I'll answer them if I can. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!